Hello and welcome back to this episode of 5 Alarm Task Force. If you're listening to the audio, if you're listening and watching us on the video, welcome. We're happy to have you with us. I'm Steve Green, your host. Happy to be here with you. Happy to have you with us. And my returning guests today are friends that I can finally say, friends that I met, not just on the podcast through it, but we've actually met. We've been in person together. And although we've made many friends over these 7 years, these two are two of the most important because of what they do and who they are. And it's my honor and pleasure to welcome back Dr. Alberto Juan Caban-Martinez. He is a board-certified physician and scientist, tenured associate professor of public health services, deputy director of the MD-MPH program, and associate provost for research integrity at the University of Miami. He has over 10 years of domestic and international practice experience and research expertise in environmental and occupational health. Dr. Caban-Martinez also serves as the Deputy Director of the Firefighter Cancer Initiative at the Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center, which is part of the UM medical program. Also joining us, Dr. Natasha Solle. She is Co-Deputy Director, Firefighter Cancer Initiative at Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center, Research Assistant, Professor, departments of Medicine and Public Health Sciences at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. Dr. Solle is a nurse scientist and research assistant professor of medicine and public health sciences at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. She also serves as co-director of Behavioral and Community-Based Research Shared Resource, known as BCSR, at Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center. Dr. Solle's research interests focus on occupational cancer risks and improving cancer screening in underserved communities. She has played a critical role in the conception of the Firefighter Cancer Initiative, a multifaceted project funded by the state of Florida to study firefighters' exposure to carcinogens, examine their cancer risk, and develop methods of education about prevention and early detection. She has led multiple projects within FCI focusing on the epidemiology and cancer screening behaviors of active and retired firefighters. To both of you, welcome back. It's been a long time, but we're thrilled to have you back with us.
Steve, it is really great to see you.
Back.
Thank you so much. Now, as I was reading those brochures, and we talked this before we went on the air, that we're going to start with a very important piece of information that I didn't see in the last couple of months, but Dr. Caban-Martinez brought it up here. So we're going to start with that because it's very important for you to know, and especially if you are firefighters, and again, career, volunteer, paid on call, WUI, the fact is, if you're fighting fire, you're at risk, okay? And we're going to talk about where we've come with our cancer risk and the Firefighter Cancer Initiative, especially here in Florida. But we're also going to talk about this new classification that Dr. Caban-Martinez just mentioned before we went on the air. So, Dr. Caban-Martinez, we'll start with you. First of all, welcome back. We're so happy to have you with us again. We know how busy you are, and we thank you both for taking time to join us for this podcast. So we'll start with you, Dr. Caban-Martinez. Please let us know about this new classification regarding cancer in the fire service, please.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. But before we get started, please call us by our first name. We respond to hey, you, anything is fine, except our designations. So thank you. And then before I get started, I also just wanted to say thank you for being, a steadfast and unwavering champion of firefighter health and safety. When we started this with you, these conversations with you, which is now hard to believe years ago, you've been able to be an amazing conduit of sharing really key and important information. So, on behalf of our team, our PI, Dr. Aaron Kobitz, we are incredibly thankful to you and the podcast for being able to disseminate this really important information.
Well, thank you. It's our honor.
So let me begin by sharing with your listeners something really important that has happened since we last chatted. So there is an international agency called the International Agency for Research on Cancer, or IARC for short. It's an agency that falls within the World Health Organization, and its primary focus is to control cancer, understand what causes it and how we can control it in human populations. One of the programs that IARC offers is called a monograph series, where they issue about 3 of these really thick monographs. If you ever seen like a big thick textbook, right, that could be like a doorstop. This is what these monographs look like. They issue about 3 of them a year. So your listeners may recall that back in 1998 or close to around 2000, they released a monograph number 98 that was focused on 3 things about work. One was shift work, painting, and firefighting. And at the time, that monograph reached the conclusion that firefighting was considered a group 2B carcinogen. Basically, a review of all the science at the time to that time point said that there is some considerable risk in firefighting. And it was interesting that it was coupled with the same photo of people doing shift work, because it's like not only is the profession of firefighting itself, exposure to carcinogens, but the fact that you undergo shift work, which is also carcinogenic. And we consider shift work as an exposure to carcinogens through hormone dysregulation, right? If you're not sleeping your regular time shifts, your hormones are all off. Therefore, that contributes also to cancer. So fast forward till now, 2022, and the IARC was commissioned to redo the analysis and see, based on everything that's been new since that initial monograph to present day, does that new literature change at all the grade or the scale? So over about a year and a half, about 25 scientists created like a work group to review a lot of new literature. In the last 20 years, there's been a lot that has been coming online from different countries about cancer risk in the fire service. And in June of 2022, so it's about a year from now, since we've been recording this podcast, that the team finished a conclusion and had an executive summary that's available right away on the Lancet. I can share with you that link for your listeners if they want to see the executive summary. It's only 2 pages. And the determination there at that point was that the risk of cancer in the fire service got elevated from that 2B designation up to a group 1, so the highest level, specifically for kidney cancer and mesothelioma. Is what elevated it to a grade 1 risk of firefighting being a cancer. Grade 1 is really serious, right? So that means that if you're exposed to this, you have a high risk of developing cancer. In this same monograph, there was also a couple of other things that were elevated beyond cancer. So it was not just that, kidney cancer and mesothelioma were the only ones, but also prostate cancer, colon cancer, some of the other digestive ones were elevated as well in this monograph. And so this is really key for our firefighters, as there's now evidence, right, to show that not only is there a grade 1 designation for kidney and mesothelioma, but that there's increased evidence, even though it looks on the paper like it's limited evidence, it's increased evidence for colon, prostate, testicular, melanoma, and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So that has been a big change since we last met, this IARC release. And I want your listeners to know that this is, like you mentioned earlier, this is not just about career sort of structural firefighting. This impacts all firefighters, including wildland firefighting, fire investigators, volunteers. Everybody is impacted by this. If you fight fires in any way, this information is for you.
That is stunning information. There's no doubt about it. I don't think that any of us, even though we've been working with this for several years already, in the official Firefighter Cancer Initiative, realized that a national or international organization was looking at it as closely as this and came up with this latest bulletin. And I think the fact that these, as I mentioned before we start recording, was that we know that a lot of the podcasts we've done that have focused on the Firefighter Cancer Initiative or cancer in the fire service have the greatest reach to our audience around the world. People thought, well, it's only going to be talking U.S., maybe Canada. Well, U.S. and Canada lit it off, but there is now interest and work being done all over the world, and we've seen this with these podcasts. As we look at our stats in the countries, we've had these podcasts are some of the most successful, going out to over 40 countries across 6 continents. And I think that echoes the interest and concern that our brothers and sisters around the world have, because a lot of the changes that we said have happened here in the United States really have happened worldwide. And the change, for example, in furniture, how it went from real wood and real furniture to man-made versions, and how that in and of itself changed our ability to respond, the time we have to respond to a fire from its incipient stage to its active stage. And where we used to have, there was an article in one of the trades over the weekend that said it used to be, I think by 1990 or 1988, we had up to 17 minutes to get on scene. Now we have between 3 and 4 minutes to get on scene before it moves from that incipient stage. So I think the same thing holds true. We have to understand, for our viewers and listeners need to understand, that this is the same truth with cancer. Having gone through 2 scares myself, and having a oncologist who initially didn't know anything about the Firefighter Cancer Initiative, but I taught him about it, and he's been very interested in it ever since. And he was the one who said, their firefighters need to know now exactly, really have an idea of what they're fighting fires with. The only thing they can be sure of that's maybe still the same as the old days is fighting a woods fire or grass fire. But then you're still wearing gear, and we haven't even gotten to that point, the problem with the gear that we wear. But now everything else that burns, from cars to furniture in the home to big box stores, has very, very heavy carcinogenic composites in it. And so we have to understand that every time we're fighting a fire that's burning, whether it's a wastebasket, a dumpster, or a factory, we are always going to be faced with carcinogens in those fires.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Steve, going back to the international reach, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit more about, so every February we host our International Firefighter Cancer Symposium. So this year we had members that were part of the IARC meeting. So including Dr. Caban-Martinez, Alberto, who was there. We had several other scientists and doctors that were part of that meeting in France come and present. And so we had people from Australia, from Portugal, from Canada, and just to see the response from firefighters. So we had close to 400 people in person and another 400 people online, from all over the world, participating, asking questions, interacting with not only the scientists, but we also had firefighters from Canada, firefighters from Australia. So it really is reaching, a worldwide audience. And so I just wanted to share that with you, as far as, if people are interested in hearing more about, the IARC monograph and what went into it, because it was broken down in 3 groups. So epidemiology studies, mechanistic studies, and then environmental and exposure studies. And so, the symposium was a really great opportunity for us to break down everything that went into this reclassification and kind of made it a little more digestible. And anyone can go onto our website at sylvester.org/firefighters, and you can see all of the presentations that were there, from everyone that presented and participated. It also gave us a really great opportunity on the second day to have workshops in small groups, where people were able to work together and kind of talk about future collaboration. So not only scientists, but firefighters, community members. So it was really a great opportunity. What's great was everything was filmed and distributed and saved online. So if people want to go back and look at that, it's a really great resource.
That sounds terrific. We'll see if we'll get that information as well and put that in the show notes. But the fact that you're seeing that buy-in, I think, is the most important fact. Because when we started our talks together several years ago, we were still getting a lot of resistance. And it was, sometimes it felt like, and I'm sure you guys felt it too, banging your head against the wall. You know what was in front of you. You saw it and you tried to share that message, but some people just didn't want to believe it. And unfortunately, when it was somebody else in the department who was diagnosed, we start to see the buy-in through that. Wait a second, this is really happening. This isn't just what we're hearing from other people in other states. My friend Dave here in the fire department was just diagnosed with, renal cancer, and he's one of the healthiest guys we ever had in our firehouse. That's right. But we don't want it to get to that point, do we? We're trying to still get that education out there so that they don't wait for that something bad to happen. We've promoted on most of the podcasts, promote that if you're going to your doctor, your own personal doctor, tell them right away that you have been a firefighter. Let them know. Keep track of your exposures. And now both the IAFF, the IAFC, and National Volunteer Fire Council all have samples of questionnaires or forms you can keep to track your exposure, and let people know about it, and make sure that you know where you've been, so that, heaven forbid, you have a problem. It might be easier for the doctors to track if you've kept track of your exposures, where you've had that light bulb go off and say, I better keep track of this one, things like that. So
yeah, and I think that brings up, I know we want to talk about some of the new things that we've done in the last couple of years since we've last spoken. So there's a couple things that we've been doing in Florida that is available to everyone at a national level. So one is our personal exposure reporting app. That's been around now for I think for 7 years. But this is free to all firefighters, and it's exactly what you're saying. An easy way to report and keep track of all of their exposures, and it's very simple. It's all on their their smartphone. They can go in and say what the incident was, how long they were in there, what was burning. We've actually edited added to it for fire investigators, so they can talk about their specific fire incident. But we also ask questions related to decon practices, and then any type of health effects after, if they were coughing, if they had chest pain, anything like that. So then they have those records, and they can keep them for themselves. And the other good thing about it is they can go back retrospectively and put that information in if they knew they were on X number of fires, before they downloaded the app. The other thing that we've really been working really hard on is our education related to clinical screening. So we have a clinical team now, where we have a firefighter cancer prevention and wellness clinic. And so we've actually adapted it to make it mobile, so it's easier for our firefighters. So we were able to purchase through a foundation grant a Sprinter van that we've turned into a clinic room. And so our nurse practitioner and our nurse, they take it to the fire station. They do a full head to toe yearly physical, and then refer them for cancer screenings depending on their age. So with that comes a lot of education. We've created basically like a cheat sheet that they can take with them to the doctors if they go to another doctor, about what they should be screened for and at what age, because they're considered high risk because they're firefighters. And so we've used the American Cancer Society, the U.S. Task Force, but also bringing in the NFPA standards to determine the screening recommendations that we're giving for firefighters. So that's another really great resource that, again, we can share that information where they can download it. It's actually on a toolkit that we've created that is free and online as a mobile app. So if they go to their app store and just type in Firefighter Cancer Initiative, it has all of that information for them. And it's a really great resource. Not only does it have the screening information, but also gives you information on all of the current research studies that we're doing, all our videos, education materials. So it's a really great resource. We'd be happy to share it with you and your audience.
Great. Well, thank you. We're going to make sure we mention that in the show notes as well. One of the other things I'd like to touch on, and this deals with my situation, was that I finally was able, my oncologist was able to get me cleared to have the PFAS labs done on my blood samples. And it took him about 4 weeks to get it all arranged and stuff like that, because he said, listen, I'm not going to have you do it unless I know it's paid for by Medicare, because some of these tests can be exorbitant, he said. So he says, I'll work on it tomorrow, but because you should have by Monday. Well, it was about 5 weeks later, but they stuck with it and they got it. And thank goodness, came back as in the normal range. There was no problem with it. And back in 2018, which was my second scare, we did the bone marrow assay at that point. And again, I was cleared with that. And so for me, actually, he was when I first took ill in 2020 and didn't know what it was, even with my background, he was the first one I reached out to, because I figured heavy weight loss and severe lethargy and things like that, maybe I came down with some form of cancer. But I went to him and he checked me out, and he says, no, he goes, I would have seen in 2018 the little seeds if you were going to be sick in 2020. And so he says, so I think that's not going to be the cause. And it turned out it was not, thank goodness. But I know that one of the strongest points we've tried to make is being tested. When he asked me, he said to me, well, we can do the bone marrow test right here in my office. I said, when? He goes, we'll do it right now. And I said, what does it take? He goes, just lay on your side. I said, all right, I got a deal for you. I said, we can do it now if you hold off on the epinephrine. Just give me the lidocaine. He goes, my job is to keep my patients out of pain. I'm not going to put epinephrine because I know that hurts. He goes, I'll just give you the lidocaine block. And I said, that's fine. And we did it. And it really was a nothing event. It just a little tiny discomfort, but it was so worthwhile, because when I've been back with him over the last 2 years, my follow-ups, and again, this is, folks, I'm not in any way saying I have cancer. I do not, thank God. I just see him as a regular basis, because he has been the person I could trust in and has been testing me, because as a former firefighter, and then with the new, what turned out to be autoimmune disorders. But we need to let our viewers and listeners know that you're not showing any weakness when you have a test. What you're doing is you're buying, it's an insurance policy perhaps, to show that you and your family and your kids and your parents and everybody else know that you are okay, and you're doing everything you can to be okay. Because this isn't just about you. It's about those who care about you as well. And sometimes we lose that part of it as we're trying to educate them. We also have to kind of teach them with our arms around them and saying, look, this is for your health, make sure you're better. You have a long career or a long, healthy retirement.
Yeah, Steve, if I could say, what you're saying is a very important and key message, that testing and screening is really critical to knowing where you are, right, and where you stand. I wanted to talk just a second about sort of like PFAS and PFAS testing, because I know on your podcast, there's been discussion on PFAS. The testing and screening of PFAS is sort of like evolving in the general population, right? Not, separate and distinct from our firefighters. And it's good and important to know like where you're at and where you stand. Right now, there is testing for PFAS in blood, that you can have a blood test, a simple blood test, and know, what kind of perfluorinated alkyl substances you have in your body. But let me just take a step back and just refresh, especially if they're hearing this for the first time, that PFAS is a chemical compound, and it's a family of compounds. So there's over like 4,000 different types of PFAS out there, and they're not natural chemicals. They were man-made, in the 1940s and 1950s, by third-party companies that were using them for different purposes, and then realized that they have a property where they can repel water. And because of their ability to do that, because of the carbon and fluorine bonds being very strong in these PFAS chemicals, they've been placed in a lot of different things that we use as consumers, right? So if you fry an egg in the morning, sunny side up, and it swivels around in your pan, chances are there's some type of PFAS congener analyte, some type of it there that's making it smooth. Same thing as if you spill some wine on your couch, and it forms beads and it trickles off, or your raincoat forms beads and it trickles off. That tends to be some of those PFAS compounds that have that water repellent property. In the literature, we've been learning that our firefighters are exposed to it through the turnout gear, the water barrier liner that's inside the safety turnout gear. It's also in aqueous film fighting foams, as part of different types of mixtures of the AFFF. Have these PFAS chemicals in there. And so as we learn more about the health effects of it, where regulations are trying to control the presence and type of those PFAS that are on there. Military DoD has been testing for them. So as part of the annual physical exam, I think maybe like 3 or 4 years now, I can't remember, is mandated, to have the annual for, I think, 7 of the different types of PFOA, PFAS compounds. And then the challenge that becomes for us is, as healthcare providers, is what is normal, right? What PFAS is normal? So the answer should be, you shouldn't have any PFAS in your blood, period, right? Because it was created by man, and this shouldn't be in the environment or in different products. But unfortunately it is, and sort of monitoring and testing and knowing where you're at is important. So you know where you're at. We don't necessarily have what are considered normal levels. I just finished doing a stint on the National Academies of Sciences Committee as a liaison for the fire service for PFAS. It was a committee that was done to understand, health advisory for PFAS. And that's still a little bit confusing about, what is normal PFAS levels in your blood, right? If we're trying to learn like what normal PFAS levels look like to say development of cancer or development of heart disease, because you have this high level of PFAS. For your readers, it's important, for your listeners, it's important to know that like PFAS can last a very long time in the body. Some of them last as short as 2 years or a year. Some of them can last 7 to 8 years, depending on the type of chemical composition, like what it looks like. That type of PFAS. Interestingly, I did want to share with your readers, we're always looking for solutions. We're like, well, what do I do? I've got PFAS in me. So one is, if you test yourself, what kind of, the type and concentration of PFAS you have in your blood, but you don't know where it's coming from, right? Am I drinking this in my water source? Is this coming from my gear? Is this coming from like the 3, AFFF events that I served in the last 6 months? We don't necessarily know the exact point sources, but testing helps us determine, is my levels going up or is it going down, right? So about a year ago, the Australian firefighters did what we call a randomized clinical trial. It's sort of like the gold standard of evaluating an intervention or an effect of something. And they basically randomized Australian firefighters into either donating blood, like whole blood, or donating plasma. And they basically had like a sample of firefighters that were enrolled into this randomized clinical trial. Some got nothing. They didn't have to donate any blood. They just watched them for a whole year. Some got put into an arm of investigation where they had to donate whole blood every so often, like every 6 weeks to 8 weeks. And then others had to do plasma. So they go into a machine, the machine processes and, takes out plasma and then puts it back at different intervals. And what they learned is that plasma donation was both worked at reducing PFAS, whole blood donation and plasma donation. I think it was like about one or so milligrams per deciliter in the blood. So if you know, like, if you are a firefighter that has, high PFAS in the blood, one way to do it is regular, blood donations. That study sort of raised a lot of questions in our mind too about, what happens to this blood after it's been collected, and sort of the ethics of, like, putting it back into circulation, right? Because it could be used for an operation for someone else. And otherwise, and those are still being hotly debated right now. But at least it does provide some interim solution. Should you have a first responder that does have elevated PFAS levels, to think about, blood donation as it. Even though you still have to evaluate the point sources, like where is that PFAS coming from? Is it coming from their gear or their foam or some other source in the station or outside of work?
Well, yeah, I think that is absolutely imperative. And it's, again, the two things that firefighters detest the most are change and status quo. So right. It's important that we work to, again, to educate. I don't think we need to beat anybody over the head, but I think it's important that we educate about the development now, what's happened with our looks at PFAS since it broke several years ago. And as I mentioned before we started, we're very lucky that next week we close off our 7th season with Diane Cotter, who, along with her husband Paul, really blew the lid off the issue of PFAS in firefighter gear. And so they've been great ambassadors for us to get that message out to other firefighters, because Paul was a firefighter. He's still a firefighter, just like I'm still a firefighter. It's who we define ourselves as after our service. And thanks to the two of them, that message, initially it was a very difficult ride, but that message got out there. We had great people come up from around the country to help and back it up. The whole team that you have at Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center, working on the Firefighter Cancer Initiative, is a big part of that. And it's these kind of episodes that, just because we know now what PFAS, better idea what it is, where it is, how we're dealing with it, and there are certain tests, and now we even have a possible way of lowering elevated levels in certain firefighters. We have to get the message out still, though. This is not the end of the issue with PFAS and PFOA. As we said, it's global. It's not just firefighters in the United States. It's firefighters all over the world, but it's also people, innocent citizens. Just wherever we live, this chemical's been around, as Alberto said, since the late 40s and into the 50s. And whether or not the manufacturers knew it was carcinogenic is still being debated in scientific papers that I don't read. But we know that as more news comes out, and teams like the one at yours at Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center, and other teams around the country are going to update what they're doing to stay at that highest level of information that you share with the people in the area that you're working in and protecting, like you are here for us here in South Florida. But again, my question, and maybe we'll take a break here and we'll come back with this, is education. The best way that the two of you, how we can better educate our firefighters so that they don't feel that we're trying to change the way their service or lessen it. They are men and women in the fire service in this country, all around the world. These people who give of themselves, whether it's career or volunteer, makes no difference. It's the fact that these men and women dedicate themselves to protecting lives and property in various communities. And so if they're willing to rise to that point, it's our obligation, I believe, to to back them up with as much information as we can. And at the same time, with something like PFAS, keep our citizens aware as well, because that's out there in the public now. In the public thing, I've seen several articles on national newspapers that discuss this. All right, so folks, we're going to take a quick break here. And if you're watching the video, you will not see anything different. If you're listening to the audio, well, we're going to take a little break, have a couple of words, and then we'll be back with our guests, Dr. Alberto Caban-Martinez and Dr. Natasha Solle, as we talk about the Firefighter Cancer Initiative here in Florida and how it affects firefighters and people, regular people, all around the world. So we'll be right back right after these words. As always, please stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to this episode of 5-Alarm Task Force. I'm your host, Steve Green. And with us today are two longtime supporters and friends of the podcast. They came to me in my first year. We met at an office in the Deerfield Beach, and it was an amazing opportunity. Our mutual friend, Todd LeDuc, who was then the Executive Assistant Chief of Broward County Fire and is now the Chief Strategy Officer for LifeScan Wellness Centers. We were all together, and with me today, once again, is Dr. Alberto Caban-Martinez and Dr. Natasha Solle, and they are the leaders of the Firefighter Cancer Initiative team at Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center's Firefighter Cancer Initiative Center, along with University of Miami. And we are talking about, the changes in several years since we've all been, three of us have been together, talking about the Firefighter Cancer Initiative. It's come a long way from where we were several years ago. We've had some good work. As I said, the state of Florida, we had, excuse me one second, sorry about that. We talked about the fact that here in Florida, the state got money initially a couple of years ago for quick decon tools, bucket, brushes, stuff, to be delivered available to every fire department in the state of Florida. And I believe we were the first state to even do something like that. And I think part of that is because of the influence that the Sylvester Cancer Comprehensive Cancer Program has had, because you guys have been researching longer than I've been doing the podcast, and you've been there taking us through it. So you mentioned that there are some new facts, new data, and new items that we should hear about. So Alberto, if you would, please.
Yeah, we're excited to share a couple of new and different projects that we've been working on, especially since we last spoke. So one really important project to us that's still ongoing now for about 5 years is the National Firefighter Tumor Bank. So this is an opportunity for your listeners to learn about this biorepository and why it's special. Understanding why we see certain types of cancer arise in the fire service is really key, right? So if you look at what are the top 3 things that most Americans die of, right? So the first thing is cardiovascular disease. So the number 1 killer among any American, regardless if you're a firefighter or not, is cardiovascular disease. The second most common cause is cancer. And then the third most common cause are unintentional injuries. So then you say, okay, well, if the second most common cause is cancer, so then why should I care about it? Everyone's going to die of either cardiovascular disease or cancer. Well, for us as clinician scientists, the interest is that we are seeing specific types of cancers arise in the fire service at very high rates. And that's not normal, right? And that's something that we can use both medicine and science to evaluate and limit the risk of developing those really specific types of cancers. There should be no reason that our firefighters experience that. And so when we do our science, we prioritize based on the cancers that we see elevated within the fire service. So for us as scientists to understand what those cancers are, how they come about, what type of treatments are best for them, we need to study that cancer. So the best way to do it is to collect them, take a look at them, under the microscope. Do they look very different in how they appear between a firefighter and a non-firefighter? And so having that data available to us is really key. And the way that we've been working in the National Firefighter Cancer Initiative is to ask firefighters to donate a sample of those cancers should they arise. So any firefighter that's interested that has been diagnosed previously with cancer, even if it was 2 or 3 years ago, they should reach out to us at the National Firefighter Cancer Initiative and engage with our nurse navigator, Johanna Garibaldi, who leads the tumor bank for firefighters, and she'll help with you for free to go grab the sample that's saved by pathology, frozen that they have. And then we bring it over to our Firefighter Cancer Initiative. And we use them in a lot of different experiments because we would like to learn whether those tissues of those cancers, they have different blood vessels or what type of molecules are inside of them, if they are different from one that you would see in a person that's non-fire. So we want to make sure that your listeners are aware that there is this national resource. Also for other scientists that may listen to your podcast that want to use firefighter tumor samples to study for a particular type of cancer, whether it's kidney cancer or thyroid cancer or prostate cancer, that they donate those samples to us. It's really easy. The workload falls on us to get the paperwork and retrieve the sample, but you make a huge difference by allowing us to have that sample so that we can study it in science.
That's amazing. I don't think everybody has heard of blood banks, but
Right.
I don't think anybody's ever heard of a tumor bank. But it makes perfect sense, because if we can study those from around the country and see how they fall for some areas might be much less than others, and some might be much worse than others, and some could be on a par. I think that would be phenomenal and provide so much more medical information to help us even perhaps prevent or better treat cancers when they happen to firefighters.
Yeah, that's right. Because if you think about it, like if, let's say I went to my urologist to get evaluated for prostate cancer, they'll do a biopsy, of the prostate, and take those samples to the lab and process them to see, like, well, do you have prostate cancer or not? So what happens to that, that sample when it goes to pathology? Well, they save it, right? They put it in a cassette and they put it in a specific solution to preserve it over time. Should it need to be evaluated. So one way that firefighters can help the science of cancer in the fire service is by just working with our team to let us have a piece of that sample so that we can store it and then use it for different science, like you said, and compare different tissues. If it's worse or the same than a non-firefighter, or even within firefighters, compare the severity based on the type of exposures that they see on fire scene to the type of cancer that came out. That makes a big difference for us as scientists.
Right. And we want to stress the point that no one is asking to cut into you if you've been diagnosed. This is
right.
using tissue that was surgically removed from you, either during the biopsy, during the testing, or during treatment. And that's what the Firefighter Cancer Initiative here in Florida would use. Nothing to do with going in, asking you to let them cut something out of you personally for this test. No, that is not what you heard. It is simply going to be using tissues that have been surgically removed from you under the proper conditions, because it was necessary from a diagnosis point. And then they use that, and they'll use that for their comparisons and learning more about the prevalence of certain cancers in areas, in local areas, state areas, could be exposures. There's so much, I guess, information that those kind of exams could provide to you, correct?
Yeah, they make a huge difference. Yeah, and just understanding those the types of tissues, right? Like if you think about thyroid cancer, so thyroid cancer is elevated in the fire service. We often see it 2 times or 3 times more higher in men and women firefighters than we do in the general population. The most common type is papillary thyroid cancer. It's like if you look at 100% pie, right, like a pie chart with 100%, this is the bulk of all the types of cancers that come up there. So understanding if that type of cancer is very different in the fire service, firefighter compared to the general population is really key for us, because it can help with informing screening, like what type of screening should be done with how often. And if you do get that cancer, what type of treatments are best effective, because we see this type of cancer arise in the fire service. So having those samples really informs many different aspects of, screening, prevention, treatment, and then rehabilitation to get them back into the fires, the fire service.
Right. So
Steve, I just want
yes, go ahead.
to echo what Alberto was saying, as far as if someone gets a biopsy or something, their doctor collects it and is already keeping it. So if you were someone said, oh, well, I was diagnosed last year, I wish I would have known, we can still get that sample, because it's just a matter of paperwork of our pathology talking to the pathology lab that they had already donated to, and because they already have it. So I know that question comes up a lot, as far as like, oh, I wish I knew, I got it, a year ago. There's still opportunity that we can get those samples, and so we're able to study their tumors or their tissue.
That's
exactly.
That's great to know. And what we'll do is we'll make sure we have information about that in the show notes as well, so that if you do want to contribute tissue that has been removed from you, and you want to contribute that and donate that to the team at the Firefighter Cancer Initiative here in Miami, we'll have that information for you. If we don't have it in time for the show notes, we'll still make sure we have it, and we'll make it available through our email. We'll give you the email address, which is always on every show as well, and so you can reach out to us that way. But it is a way to, when you think about it, I'm talking to our listeners and viewers, when you think about it, this is a way for you to help not only other people today, but you could be helping people in the future, because what they learn from studying these tissues, especially from a wide group of firefighters around the country, this would help see what we can do in other ways to either prevent or treat these cancers down the road. Thank goodness we've seen tremendous strides in the care for cancer patients between technology and pharmacology. And this is could be another step that could help us in the battle, not just firefighters, but we can help others as well by our researchers looking at these tissues, having an idea what generated it, what it caused, what's the result after the removal, etc. And other doctors can learn from that, and other research teams can learn from that. So this is a wonderful opportunity to help not just firefighters, but to help people to understand cancers, understand and let our doctors and researchers know how these cancers are working individually. Because while this firefighter might have thyroid cancer, and this fire might have thyroid cancer, they may not be the exact same cancers. And so pieces of each one of those, they're different, will help that team know this one was from this firefighter who had this kind of cancer. This was from a different firefighter, but they almost look the same with that type of cancer. And the more we learn, the better we can take care of each other. And that's the most important part.
Steve, speaking about the future, and there's another sort of project we wanted to share with you about that started relatively like in the last 2 years about metals and understanding metals and cancer. If we want to talk about that today.
Sure. Well, if you have the time, I'd love to hear it. Yeah.
So I know hot in discussion recently is sort of electric vehicle fires, right, and how they can be challenging and persistent fires to turn off. So electric vehicle fires obviously operate on batteries. in these vehicles, and they emit concentrations of metals, particularly heavy metals, that we're concerned about its relationship to health effects. So certain metals are really essential to the human body. They help metabolism run, right? So selenium and zinc, you need those to help run the citric acid cycle. Not to bring us back down to biology from high school, but they're really important metabolic pathways. But it turns out some of these other metals that are on the periodic table of elements also can be hazardous to our health as humans, particularly to our firefighters who are being exposed to these in high concentrations during fire suppression activities. So our team has been trying to creatively figure out a way to monitor, to what we call like biomonitoring of the firefighter workforce of heavy metals. And I would say in the last 2 to 3 years, we've been working on using toenail clippings from firefighters as a way to give them feedback on what heavy metals they're exposed to over the long term. So let me explain sort of like how this works, right? Heavy metals, if you have a fire of a car, that plume will also contain the presence of these metals. They can enter the firefighter's body either through thermal absorption on the skin, or they can be inhaled through the lungs, or they can be ingested. This is why you should never eat on the fire scene, right? Even if you want a snack or something, because you could be ingesting different carcinogenic compounds. Turns out these heavy metals, they aerosolize as well. So they're in the air plume and they can enter the firefighter through any of those ways. Normally, clinically, the fastest way to determine if somebody has heavy metals in their system is doing a blood sample, and you get what type of heavy metals are free flowing in that moment that you took that blood sample. But what kind of metals did the firefighter come across over time, over a long extended of time? So this is where toenail clippings, believe it or not, are really helpful and useful. I know we just throw them away in the trash can, or wherever, whenever you cut your toenails, but they actually are a really useful piece of information. So the way I like to explain it is, if you've ever chopped down a tree or looked at the stump of a tree, you notice that the stump has rings around it, right? So at the center of the stump is like a dot, and then a series of rings appears around the tree depending on its maturity and age. In fact, botanists will use it to tell you like, 10 years ago, there was a plague or there was a heavy rain season, because they can see the presence of those artifacts on the rings of the tree. Well, guess what? It turns out our toenails are not much different. So if you look at the clippings of the toenail, right, the tail end, the one that we cut off every so often, those are a matrix, sort of like rings on toenails that allow us to see what you were exposed to 6 months ago to 9 months ago. So we've been pilot testing with our firefighters the collection of these toenail clippings and characterizing what heavy metals they're in there. So the way that our experiment works is that we ask firefighters to either postal mail them, or if we see them in person at the fire station or at a conference, if they would give us their toenails. We separate the the clippings that come from the 2 big toes are kept in a separate envelope than from the toenail clippings of the 8 other toes. We take those toenails back here to the lab at the University of Miami at Sylvester, and we sort of clean them out, right? We put them in a high vibration and a series of washes, and then digest them. We can put that digested toenails into a machine called ICP-MS. And it's really cool because it tells you the charge potential of metal. So it looks at that little fluid and it says, okay, this metal, are you present? And how much are you present in that sample? And so we can take that toenail clipping and then say, well, in the last 6 months to 9 months, you were exposed to these heavy metals because they were impregnated and are resident inside those toenail clippings. And so if you collect them over time, you can actually create a picture of up and down of which heavy metals came into and out of the body over time. And we call those biomarkers, right? It's sort of like the toenail clippings serve as a biomarker of heavy metal exposures, and have been recently developing those approaches so that we can look at long-term effects of heavy metal exposure and then link them to health, right? Like, does that contribute to the development of a certain type of cancer or cardiovascular disease and so on?
That is fascinating, but I will caution you folks listening and watching, please do not send any toenails to 5-Alarm Task Force, okay? We are not collecting them for them. No, please don't start flooding us with toenails. But again, we will give you the email address in the show notes to reach us if you were to get some of the information that we've talked about today. But again, that's something fascinating, and I think one of the things that I've learned from the two of you since we first met at that first meeting is the fact that you and your team are constantly looking for new ways. You're thinking outside the box. You've since we've talked the first time, you're always looking for another pathway to find cancer, another pathway to help fight this cancer, how to avoid this cancer, what's causing it. And just even again, this concept of the heavy metals in the toenails. Yeah, it sounds kind of joking at first, but when you think about the scientific and health values of something as simple as our toenail clippings, as you said, that we normally just either, if we're doing it ourselves, throw it away. It's done at a pedicure and they get rid of it. But the fact that they're full of information that can be used to help these teams, and not just our team, but wherever it's being shared, learn about the heavy metals in our body. That is another, as you stated, is another danger that firefighters face. That's why we work so hard to recommend, and not just to the firefighters, but to their communities, that every firefighter has 2 sets of gear so that we can decon one after a working fight. No, we don't have to decon after if they wear their gear and taking a little kitty down from a tree. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about inactive fires. When they get in there and they're fighting the fire, even if they're outside, depending on how the wind blows and how much wind, that can affect them. When they're inside and the fire is done, they put out the fire. We do something what's called overhaul. We have to make sure that there are no embers, live embers, anywhere in that building or that home that could rekindle the fire. So we go in there and take down parts of the walls and things in the kitchen and this, that. Now, what we used to do, because we're retired and sweaty from doing the firefighting, we would take off our bunker gear, at least our jackets, so we could be a little bit cooler. Well, what we didn't realize is that when we sweat like that, our pores are open. And it's a two-way street. It's not just our sweat coming out. It's 2 ways. And a lot of the carcinogens that are still floating in the air, even though the fire has been wetted down and we're looking for embers, every time we break a piece of wallboard, every time we pull down a piece of the ceiling, especially if it has carbon on it, we are shaking those molecules loose. And with our arms out and bare, our hands bare, if we're not wearing gloves, and our pores open, that's how carcinogens get into us, or the metals get into us. As Alberto said, it can be ingested, could be transdermal, whatever. But the fact is that the toenail clippings are basically a non-scientific, for us, way to help these cancer fighting teams learn more about the cancer and heavy metals. And heavy metals can also, some heavy metals lead to carcinogens, right? Or lead to cancer?
Well, not all of them, not all of them, but some do. They have known human health effects.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is something that you can do that's basically very simple. You probably do it anyway. So instead of just throwing them in the wastebasket, put them in a little baggie, put your name on it, and then you'll send it off to the address that we'll get for you. But again, it's a simple way. It's something that you do anyway. Well, you should be doing anyway.
Right.
Especially if you're wearing those fire boots.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. But just think that we're talking about so many scientific things that have been happening to help us fight cancer in the fire service, and now here's something that basically for us is just an everyday nothing, but it can be there's value to it, and that's what you have to remember, is that simple little things can have value that can help our researchers look into what's causing these cancers in our brothers and sisters, and what can be done to treat that or avoid it, etc. So simple. Not everything has to be very complex. And thank you for sharing that with us, because I don't think any of us would have even thought about something as simple as that, how valuable it can be.
Yeah, I think what we've learned, from attending firefighter conferences and speaking to different firefighters is that, metals are a big concern now, especially with electric vehicle fires. And it was sort of our way of responding scientifically in a way of how can you biomonitor your exposure in a non-invasive way, right? Like it's easier than doing a blood test. Just, share your toenail samples and you get a picture of what you're exposed to over the long term.
That's amazing that you can actually do that. And I think that it's going to be a powerful tool as we see these electric vehicles. We now have several fire pumpers. There's one in Wisconsin. The LA City has their first electric fire engine there, and more are coming. So not only we're going to see these on the consumer driving car, but we're seeing it in business vehicles now as well, and now we're seeing it even in the fire department vehicles.
That's right. That's right.
Right. So there is we've all seen the videos of a phone being charged that burst into flame, or one of these electric skateboards or scooters, and we've seen them. As a matter of fact, a terrible fire, a 6-alarm fire in the Bronx a couple of weeks ago, the origin of that fire was a recharging lithium-ion battery. So now, that's one little battery in your notebook, computer, or in your phone, or your iPad, or something like that. Now imagine taking these big Li batteries that are in the vehicles, and you've seen on your newscast, you've seen fires in those vehicles and how difficult it is for the fire department to put out. We now know there's a certain number of thousands of gallons that it will take to smother a Li battery in an electric vehicle. But not every department has that water available. If there isn't a nearby hydrant, they'll have to bring in tankers or something like that. So exposure from this is not even just necessarily be personal. One of these fires in a vehicle is going to cause a lot of smoke, a lot of soot in the air. If you're in the traffic lanes behind that accident, you've got to keep an eye where that smoke is blowing. Keep your windows up, keep the AC going, so that you reduce your chances of exposure. And there are lots of things you can do, especially here in the fire service. We've been talking about it for these last 5-6 years. Practices you can have to reduce your exposure. And that's not what we're discussing in this podcast, but we've had multiple podcasts talking about that, because the Cancer Initiative has been an integral part of this podcast since we started and we first heard about it. And that was my friend Cindy L, who first got me involved. And then she was the one who said, you need to speak to this lady, Diane Carter. And that started a whole new whirlwind tour that I thank God that he picked me up and took me on that little trip, because I got to know Diane, and she'll be on next week, and was so important in helping us with the Firefighter Cancer Initiative, because we found, things that are happening that we just don't realize that it's happening to our firefighters. By the way, folks, I have not been, even with my paramedical background and working in the medical office for 12 years, I did not know. I was stupid. 2015, 2016, I heard about, I read in the trades, firefighters were dying from cancer in New York, and I thought it was just the guys and gals who had been working the pile. I was so wrong, and I was so naive. And it wasn't until I met Cindy online as a guest and got together and learned about Alberto and Natasha that I realized what we as firefighters were facing. And because of that, and because of the luck of having my very first interview with them 5 years ago, or maybe 6 already, that I knew that the Firefighter Cancer Initiative had to be a mainstay of this podcast, because as an educator, I would have been remiss, completely remiss, if I did not try to teach and share what I was picking up from experts like Alberto and Natasha and Dr. Peasley and so many more who have been kind enough to share and be on the show. That's where I learned about the Firefighter Cancer Initiative and how important it was. And so I want to personally thank Alberto and Natasha. Like I said, I've known them for 5 or 6 years, and every day. And by the way, please follow them on social media, because there's stuff that we don't even have time for that I follow Alberto on. I see his posts on Twitter all the time. I always make sure to read it and then, give it a like and a retweet, because the two of them have shared so much and put so much into not just the general idea of the Firefighter Cancer Initiative, but taking care of Florida firefighters. And we should be taking care of all our firefighters. But I got to thank them, especially in the University of Miami and Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer centers, I should say, because while everything they do is for the best of all. And by the way, they're one of the greatest cancer medical organizations in this country. They are listed as one of the top medical cancer facilities and programs in the country. But to thank Alberto and Natasha for their dedication to not only the cause, but to our local firefighters here in Florida. And big concern came up 2 years ago, just over a year ago, from the collapse in Sunny Isles, the condo, and the dust and everything that was coming down. And finally, on one of the newscasts, somebody spoke about there's more than just concrete dust that we're dealing with. All these firefighters out here every day, 24/7. We are dealing with results of heavy metals and everything else, other carcinogens. So and because they weren't wearing air packs, they're all wearing the K or the N95 masks. But even a rescue effort like that exposes our firefighters to danger of carcinogens or heavy metals. So you don't just think that we're waiting for something to burn and that's where all the problems come from. That's just one corner, one slice of the pie where our problems are. And we, as organization, have to be aware of the dangers that we face, and those that some we have no control over, we know that, but those that we do, we have to pay attention to those. We can't let bravado get in the way of taking care of ourselves. As we've always said, if you want to take care of others, and we applaud you for that, the first person you have to take care of is yourself. And this is one of the ways of being careful about your exposures, keeping track of them, knowing what to tell your doctors, knowing when to see a doctor. And if you need direction and help, this is the group, the team at the Firefighter Cancer Initiative at Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer at UM with Alberto and Natasha.
Thank you so much. I mean, that was just an amazing synopsis of everything that we've done. So, thank you for having us and giving us the opportunity to share with everyone. And, we hope to keep this continuing and, to be on the podcast again in the future.
We know we're planning on at least one more season. So, we'll definitely bring you back again next year as well, because there's always more happening. And like I said, I get the emails, I follow you on social media, on Twitter. So I'm trying to keep abreast of everything that's happening. And I just can't thank you both enough for taking time out of very, very busy schedules to join us today, but also more importantly, just to thank you for your dedication to protect our men and women in the fire service.
And similarly to you, Steve, thank you for, helping us get the word out and reaching to so many, firefighters, affinity firefighter groups, and others that listen to this really important podcast. Because I think part of it is the dissemination, and you are that key, that translation piece that helps us reach out so many, firefighters. Hopefully we generated some discussion through today's podcast, right? And some interest, and you don't get a flock of toenail clippings in your mail.
There'll probably be a Twitter later this afternoon. Twitter with hashtag toenails.
So I'm sorry if you start getting toenails at your office. Just redirect them our way. We're happy to receive them. But again, thank you for all that you do.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure. It's wonderful to have you back. It's been far too long, but we'll make sure we're back next season, and we'll get another update.
Awesome. Right? Sounds like a game plan.
Thank you so very much. Stay safe and stay well. And folks, this will be the end of the video. If you're listening to the audio, we'll be back after a couple of words. As always, please stay tuned.